Today, however, Mark is with us to talk about his role as member and vice chair of the Wisconsin Elections Commission, a six-member body that looks to be very busy and has been very busy and certainly will be very busy in this election year. The commission is a bipartisan regulatory agency of the state of Wisconsin, established to administer and enforce election laws in the state. The commission also trains and certifies municipal clerks and elections inspectors and is responsible for voter registration system. The commission consists of 3 Democrats and 3 Republican members. They're appointed by state legislative leaders or the governor. Mark was appointed to his position on the commission by the Assembly Minority Leader. The state legislature created the commission back in 2015 to replace the Government Accountability Board, the GAB, which at that point was regulating elections and administering elections. The commission has a staff of about 25 people led by Administrator Megan Wolf. So Mark, thanks a lot for joining us, and we look forward to your talks. Go ahead.
Well, thank you all, and thanks for giving up your lunch and sharing a few minutes with me. So at the outset, let me just say this. I think elections and democracy in Wisconsin we're really coming up to the edge of a cliff. And I don't think a lot of people understand it, or frankly, I don't know what percentage of people really care about it. So, but that's sort of under my theme, that there really is a reason for alarm. And I'm just going to talk for a bit about why I think that and why we get there. But this whole process has made me go back and revisit history, and it got me so alarmed I actually decided and agreed to do a radio show, and I'm calling it the Paul Reveres Show. And what I found out, Paul Reveres' ride in 1775 to warn Americans of the British invasion, that really wasn't made famous until I think 1861, when Henry Wadsworth Longfellow wrote his famous poem. And what I didn't realize is he wrote, he was a huge abolitionist, and he wrote this poem hoping to rally folks against the Confederacy, for abolition and for the Union, and really to rally for, think about it, democracy in a broad sense. We've always said in our historical concept we're democracy since 1776 and since adoption of the Constitution. And, we had all these folks that were slaves. It's really not a democracy if you're a slave. And so we're wrestling around this concept. And I say this because all these issues are tied up to elections, voter ID, suppression, and all these issues I'm just going to talk about here. But Longfellow ended his poem, and I just wanted to read it here. A cry of defiance and not of fear, a voice in the darkness, a knock at the door, and a word that shall echo forevermore. For born on the night wind of the past, through all our history to the last, in the hour of darkness and peril and need, the people will awaken and listen to hear the hurrying hoofbeats of that steed in the midnight message of Paul Revere. And sort of in that spirit, I ask you to all become Paul Reveres. And, I'm looking at here, the majority of these folks, I'm looking at the screen, are 45 plus. I'm just looking, we don't have a whole bunch of young people. And I think that just sort of, I see some young folks coming on, but it says something about who we are. So why do I say that this is a really alarming time, and why should each of you become Paul Reveres? Well, Craig mentioned this, for 30 years, Wisconsin had nonpartisan entities running the elections. And that sort of ended with the creation of the GAB. And the GAB was 6 retired judges, but it was still a nonpartisan staff. And it functioned for 8 years. And 2015, Dean Knutson, Speaker Voss essentially labeled the GAB a rogue agency, and they started to undo it. And when Governor Walker and Voss and company controlled Madison completely, they created the Wisconsin Elections Commission. We started in 2016. Peter Barca was the minority leader at the time, and I was appointed by Peter Barca. And the agency was sort of designed to gridlock and fail, I really think, because it was designed to have 3 Republicans, 3 Democrats, but they oversaw a nonpartisan agency. At the time, Michael Haas was the administrator. And I just want to go back to some of this history and it's sort of in the weeds, but it really gives you folks a feel of what really is going on and how personal and ugly it has gotten, and it continues to be. So Michael Haas he was the deputy director that came out of the GAB. Mr. Kennedy was hated. He was the head of the agency for a long, long time. And he had to go. Michael Haas came in, and the 6 commissioners unanimously recommended that Michael Haas be the administrator. Fitzgerald in the Senate immediately said no way, they wouldn't confirm, because on the view that Michael Haas really had an agenda. And if you recall, the GAB, the judges were critical because they were started to conduct ethical investigations into the election money, and the law was in the process of changing. And so there was this whole chase over dirty money and elections. So with the creation of the Elections Commission and the separation of the Ethics Commission, and you may wonder what's going on with the Ethics Commission, and I don't know, right? I haven't heard anything in 6 years, and it's designed 3-3, and who knows? But I mean, we really haven't, as a state, really had an agency that can effectively review ethics, my personal opinion. So the Election Commission were set up, and our first meeting, who's going to be the chair? It's a flip of a coin. Who wins the coin, and then whatever party wins the coin gets the first chair. So I got the luck of being the first chair, or the Democratic Party did, and I had the honor of serving as the first chair. And this is early June of 2016, and y'all recall, here we are coming up to one of the biggest elections in American history, November 2016. The whole focus really at that time was Russian hacking and hacking the system. There were real concerns about security and how secure were the systems. We set up a series of rules that essentially continued how elections had been handled previously. There was just before, September, October of 16, there was guidance issued 6-0 by the commission on this issue, and I'm sure you've heard about it. Maybe you haven't, and I'll tell you about it here. On who can sign, what's required for signatures on the absentee ballot return envelope. And what everybody knew was that a lot of times spouses would witness each other's absentee ballots, and on the address, they would just say same, shorthand, and people would turn them in and clerks would know who. And there was a real concern that we would, around the state, not disenfranchise all these folks, because the issue was never whether the ballot was legitimate. It's whether you had to have all the information by the witness. You have to have a witness signature, but then you have to have the address. So what's the address? Do you have to have the whole thing in a zip code? If a spouse said same, isn't that good enough? But, everybody knew. So nobody cared. And that went out, and because we wanted to encourage people to vote. And the whole policy really was, let's count all the votes. Make sure we count all the votes. So that was sort of the 6-0 consensus going into November of 16. And as we all know, Donald Trump won that election by about 22,000 votes. Amy Stein at the time had the right under the law at that time to call for a statewide election. And the whole world press was in front of the commission. And we said that we were going to prove that Wisconsin elections were fair, accurate, and that there was no fraud. We did the whole recount. Sure enough, the votes, the slight changes, a few additional votes for Trump. We found out there were some districts, some municipalities that hadn't counted Amy Stein votes just because she wasn't close. And we said, look, you got to count, even though if they're not close, you still got to count all the votes. So, but we came out of 16 establishing that the Russians hadn't hacked us, elections were fair, they were honest, and there was no fraud. Same rules essentially applied in then in November of 18. And then we're coming into November 20. The same rules are applied, but now all of a sudden we're March of 20, right? COVID hits us. And, we have like 3 weeks to go from in polling place election to mainly absentee ballots. And we all knew that we really had an emergency situation. And the bigger fights were in the agency. Like, we knew that absentee ballots were going to go out, but if they didn't come back, what were we going to do with ballots that were voted timely but not counted, not back by 8 o'clock that night? Thank God we had a federal judge intervene and said, we're going to extend that time for 7 days. So ballots that are put in the mail, voted in time, will be counted through. As a result of that, there were about 80,000 votes that were counted that would have otherwise been disenfranchised. Another issue that came up then, and this was a 6-0 vote, with COVID, all the nursing homes, assisted living facilities were locked down. Virtually, you couldn't get into them. I mean, families couldn't visit family members. We have this special voting deputies provision, and everybody on the commission knew that it was impossible to have special voting deputies to go in. And if we actually made them go twice and say we couldn't get in and then send out absentee ballots, those ballots would have never been voted and never counted. 6-0, we are going to make sure that we just tell the clerks, you can send absentee ballots to these lockdown facilities so senior citizens can vote. We did it all. Public meetings, it's all on Wisconsin Eye. Nobody said boo. Nobody said boo, because everybody wanted to win. So we get to November 20, same rules that we used in 16, the outcome is different. This time, President Trump loses by 21,000 votes. And all of a sudden, there are all these allegations, and I can't, it's too many lawsuits to count, but virtually lawsuit after lawsuit, the allegations were that rules that applied and had applied in 16 and 18 somehow were illegal, and that should justify a change in the election and the outcome. All those legal challenges were thrown out. Judge Ludwig, a Trump appointee in the Eastern District, said that the scope of the relief sought was just unbelievable, that we would give up an election and ignore the popular vote and take away the election over some administrative rule decisions that hadn't ever been challenged before the vote. I mean, he wasn't going to touch it. Judge Hagedorn, and I say that because we have essentially a one person, I mean, we have 7 justices, but we have one person right now deciding the outcome of many, many issues in Wisconsin, at least as implies maps, gerrymandering, and election matters. And I'll touch on that briefly. But throughout all these attacks, over and over again, there was established that there was no fraud, it was accurate, and Trump lost. Senator Ron Johnson said, look, there were 51,000 votes that other Republicans received that Donald Trump just didn't get. He just didn't win. Now, Dean Knudsen was a Republican, and as you recall, I mentioned way back, he, along with Speaker Voss, when they were in the assembly together, created the Wisconsin Election Commission. He had the audacity to say, look, Donald Trump didn't get 21,000 votes. He was short and he lost. And the reason I say that is important is because that has sort of become the test within the Republican Party now on how we look at elections. In about October, I think it was October, November of 21, there's a sheriff, a Racine County sheriff, sent charges over to the DA, among other people in Racine, alleging that 5 of the commissioners were guilty of felonies. And this goes back to our vote on special voting deputies. They said we're felons because we allowed senior citizens to vote safely in a pandemic. And the DA is still sitting on those charges. Now, what is really alarming about this is that Speaker Voss has said over and over again that his former colleague, Dean Knudsen, probably committed a crime. I've been in Wisconsin since 1984 when I came here to go to law school, but I think this is the first time, and maybe right now, I don't know of any other threats around the country for officials where they're trying to say that if you conduct an agency meeting, you do it publicly, you're in the middle of a pandemic, you figure out how to let senior citizens vote safely, that somehow you're a felon and you have to go. And what's behind this whole thing is a serious attack on the Wisconsin Elections Commission itself and its nonpartisan staff. Along with the alleged charges for 5 of the commissioners, there has been a repeat drumbeat. Have Megan Wolf and her number 2 resign. The 5 of us commissioners resign. So that would allow, before November, new commissioners and a new administrator. And what's really, really significant about that administrator, that's when I want to go back to Michael Haas's story. When the Republicans axed Michael Haas as the administrator, we came back and Bev Gill, who was then a Republican clerk on the commission, voted with the three Democrats 4-2 to put Michael Haas as the administrator again. Because Bev Gill knew that the hit on Michael Haas was completely personal, completely partisan, and that it was just an attack on a decent human being that had spent years and years and years as a public servant, all the voters of Wisconsin. And now we had a group, one party, a group within that party on a personal vendetta to take him out. And behind that was that the whole staff, there was intimidation of the whole staff. They wanted to have us to do a national search for what? I think they wanted us to go find a conspiracy theorist to run the agency. Fortunately, we were able to sort of broker a deal at the time. Michael Haas would leave. We had like 45 extra days to solve the problem. Because you see, if the commission can't agree and the Senate can pick, right? And so this is all about who's controlling the nonpartisan agency. Fortunately, we had a consensus on the commission at the time that Megan Wolf, who was the number 2, and frankly, she's one of the most respected people in the whole country on elections. Immediately, she, got her security provisions, national security, so she's Homeland Security. I mean, she knows the details. She serves in national leadership around the country. And if there is someone that can run fair, nonpartisan elections, it's Megan Wolf. And so we cut a deal that she would be the administrator and Fitzgerald and the Senate would confirm. They did that. Now her term's up in 23. She'd never get confirmed again. They've asked her to resign. I have here, there was a resolution introduced 2021 Assembly Joint Resolution 111, January 18th, 2022, signed by 23 Republicans calling for the resignation of Megan Wolf and the 5 commissioners. They want to control that agency in November because they're not content with letting Megan Wolf and nonpartisans run the rules and count the votes. They actually want to have the agency. So they're willing to go so far as to threaten fellow Republicans, Dean Knudsen, Marge Bosselman, with prison sentences for letting senior citizens vote. Now, Marge Bosselman, look, Dean Knudsen's a decent person. He and I disagree on a lot of things. We agree on one thing: letting seniors vote isn't a crime, especially when you do it publicly. Nobody says it's a crime until after one person loses. And everybody else that won by the same set of rules, they haven't resigned, they haven't walked away, they haven't said, look, I didn't win this election, right? Nobody says that. So there is this daily drumbeat to undermine and take over, virtually take over this nonpartisan agency. The level, if Megan Wolf wasn't so gutsy and so tough and resigned, I don't know where we'd be. Because my concern is that there's a lot of folks that in that staff wouldn't want to be part of this, an agency where you have partisan control over it, where it's supervised. We'd lose a lot of talented people. And even though elections in Wisconsin are run by clerks, right? We have some of the most if not the most decentralized elections in the country. 1,850, I think, municipal clerks, 72 counties. They're the ones that run the elections. The agency itself provides guidance. I mean, the last couple of years, we've given out millions of dollars that came from the feds on grant money, on COVID money, tons on security after the Russians, trying to get communities around the state up to speed and having secure systems. I mean, a lot of municipal clerks run the elections on their home computer, right? So, I mean, there's some communities that won't even buy this stuff. So we've done everything we could to sort of spread the wealth and provide really, really excellent training for the clerks. I think that if you go ask the clerks, you'll find that Megan Wolf and the staff is very, very well respected and do a great job. But if Megan Wolf would resign tomorrow, I don't know what would happen. Yeah, right, and we got election, right? February 15th, April 5, August, and then in November. Sorry about that, folks. So the question is, what is happening? Now, that's sort of just on the agency front. We also then, part of it had the attack of the Legislative Audit Bureau, did a complete audit. They wrote this huge report. They confirmed the election was fair, there was no fraud, but they came up with like 30 proposals that we had to redo. Commission met, 13-hour meeting, addressed all the issues. What's going on? That's not enough. They have the committee on, I always, JCRAR, the review of administrative rules. They now, if they don't like what we're doing, they issue an order saying pass an emergency rule. So we spent the other day, 3 Republicans came up with their emergency rule. The 3 Dems came up with our emergency rule. We both followed it, but nothing changed, right? Because you didn't have the votes. And part of the rule, what they wanted us to enact was dealing with drop boxes. It was legislation that they couldn't get the governor to pass. So they couldn't get it passed. So then they wanted a small group, I don't know how many Republicans on that committee can order somebody to do something. So we are on a day-to-day basis sort of basically fighting to maintain the rules. And so my personal view is the rules that ran the elections in 16, 18, 20 should be the same rules that run it in 2022. I mean, then we should just, follow the same rules and count the votes and see who wins. But all the actions are designed to change the rules and try to, and by changing the rules, upset the agency. And hopefully, there is a view that by changing the rules, you impact outcome. Now, there's 2 major lawsuits that I just want to touch on briefly here. How much time do I have, Margot?
You can go ahead.
So there is a gerrymandering case, which is not directly related to the Elections Commission, other than that we have to, once we have the new maps, redesign the whole state system so it's ready to go. And that time frame is really, it's coming up quickly. I think March 1 is when we have to have maps by. I spent some time watching the oral arguments, which went for, I think, all day, the longest oral arguments before. And our Supreme Court, I mean, they're going to write the maps. And the background on the maps are that the decision that came out of the gerrymandering that took place the last census back in 11, there was a federal court panel, right, that said it was unconstitutional. That this gerrymandered partisan system was unconstitutional because it completely preserve what in the assembly, 66 some votes for the Republicans, same in the Senate. No matter what happened, you weren't going to change those numbers. Justice Roberts wrote, look, ultimately, partisan gerrymandering is non-justiciable. The federal courts aren't going to touch it. It's up to the state courts. And that was the end of it. Our Supreme Court recently met. They said, look, at those gerrymandered maps were deemed constitutional. That's our starting point. And so we know, regardless of what happens, we're going to be living in a state that it's gerrymandered. We're going to have Republican control of the Senate and the Assembly. And the only check on that power is going to be the governor. And I tee that all up because we have right now, Rebecca Kleefisch is running for governor. Nicholson is running for governor. They're all calling for the abolition of the Wisconsin Election Commission. They're all talking about the Secretary of State taking over the elections. And they're all talking about the abolition. They don't talk about it, but implicit in it is the abolition of the nonpartisan agency that historically has always been there for, coming up 40 years now. A nonpartisan agency had been part of that infrastructure that implemented the rules and that allowed us to count the votes. That if they would abolish, put it this way, if Tony Evers doesn't win in November, I won't be sitting here as a member of the commission. They're going to change the rules and they're going to design it because they want to design it in a way that Donald Trump wins or can win in 2024. I mean, that's the stated goal and it's out there. Bob Spindell, the one commissioner that hasn't been asked to resign and hasn't been threatened with criminal charges, is a Trump elector, right? I mean, I don't know if you've watched that whole story, but while the law was being followed and Governor Evers was certifying the election, there was a separate slate of electors that sent a slate to Washington, and it was in Washington, ready there in case Vice President Pence took the bait and said, I'm not going to follow the popular vote. I'm going to look to these other electors. So, I mean, there is a reward out there for folks that are being loyal to Donald Trump. It means that they haven't, I mean, Bob Spindell voted 6-0 to let senior citizens vote. Now, he didn't vote every time, but if it was a crime in 2020 to do it, and if it was a crime in March, it was, if it was a crime at any point in time, it was a crime in March. Obviously, it wasn't a crime. But that is how jaded now our election infrastructure is, where people that are loyal to Trump are being protected, and anybody that has had the guts, including Dean Knudsen, to say that Trump lost, even though he agrees on many other things, people are threatened. That is new to Wisconsin. And I think that's new to, my world. And my view is, I don't think people get it. I think people are in the middle of COVID, people trying to figure out how to live lives. They're streaming Netflix, and they have grown up in a system where you just show up on election day, you vote, and there's, I think, a built-in perception and presumption that it's nonpartisan and it's fair. That view is being seriously undermined and attacked by the claims that Trump won, or that, and it was stolen. There are significant numbers of Wisconsin folks that actually believe that Trump won the election. and that everybody that says he lost is somehow part of a conspiracy. And then they are just feeding this base. And that's sort of where we're at. One last thing, right, is the whole Gableman. Gableman was the last attack on the elections. You know, I don't know, they've given him $700,000. I don't know what he spent. That's locked up now in courts, finding out whether the subpoenas, but I mean, they wanted to subpoena Megan Wolf and Jacobs, the chair, you know, together, you know, we do a lot together to try to maintain, you know, the election through November. But they wanted to have these depositions in a private room alone. I mean, it's like crazy stuff that a former justice would say, I can go depose people under these terms. And we're going to find out what the courts have said. They haven't ruled on that. But that becomes another prong. And this, in my mind, is a very, very, very sophisticated drip, 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 drip attack on our democracy, on our legal infrastructure, on people's beliefs in elections. And it should alarm all of us. And I hope I've alarmed some of you enough that you become Paul Reveres, because I'm telling you, we need to do something really, really quickly. And if Tony Evers doesn't win in November, we're all in a lot of trouble. With that, let's just have a discussion about where we're at. Dave, go ahead. You got it.
Yeah, Mark, thanks for taking your time to share this with us. I'm assuming that in at least a number of these lawsuits, the question had come up as to whether the commission's actions were within the scope of their authority. And I'm wondering if you can share any decisions on that question.
We're all waiting right now on the Dropbox decision. I think that's going to be the biggest, most significant decision that's going to come out on what the scope of the agency power is. The DOJ are the commission's lawyers. They've said, look at the guidance at issue, and it has to do with the Dropboxes, and it has to do with the what constitutes a signature, you know, or witness address. Those are two pieces of written guidance. DOJ says it's guidance, they're not subject to rulemaking. And, you know, the bigger issue, and I hope that Justice Hagedorn really pays attention to it, is the one on the witnesses that was a Republican made motion that 6-0 agreed that we should just look spouses that say same. If the clerk can figure out the address and put it all together, we should put it together and count the votes. We should not be about disenfranchising people. We should be about facilitating counting the valid vote. What Justice Hagedorn's going to say, because they took it, Justice Hagedorn has stayed the decision up through February 15th. There's briefing on the whole issue, whether that the stay on Bourne's decision is going to continue through April. But, you know, part of that whole decision too is this. My mom is 90. She's had a stroke. She lives with my wife and I. She can't get up and down the stairs without us. She can't get to the post office. She can't get to a drop box. Historically, the guidance said that, and we said the statute says it, right? That you can take your spouse's absentee ballot and drop it in the mailbox or the drop box. And that's not a crime, and you're not a felon for doing it. Part of Judge Bourne's decision in Waukesha was, no, that's a felony, right? My mom has to figure out how to get her absentee ballot to the post office on her own.
So Mark, my wife and I are poll captains at one of the election sites here in Waukesha. If the Bourne decision were not stayed, would we not be able to accept write-in ballots that were delivered to us at the election site?
I don't want to make an overbroad statement and a prediction on how you implement that, okay? Because who brings it in, and there's a million different issues. Yep. What I do know is that if the stay isn't extended, Bourne's decision will go into place. And our guidance is going to be automatically withdrawn, and the clerks are going to be on their own. Because Bourne said that our guidance should have been subject to rules. So, I mean, first he said we have a wrong interpretation of the law. And secondly, you had two bases. For it to be effective, it had to be a rulemaking process, and it wasn't. So our guidance wasn't a rule, so it's not effective. I think personally, and I said this during our meeting, we needed that decision, and I'm glad that the Supreme Court took this case. I mean, frankly, I hope they stay it and through April, because we have the February election, April election. In my view, it's one election, and you shouldn't be changing the rules in the primary and in April because of, anyway. But everyone needs to know what the rule is going to be come August and come November. And the fact that the Supreme Court is taking it now, taking it early, I think is important. I think that's why Justice Hagedorn, voted to take it. He took it, but he maintained the stay. Go ahead, Jerry.
Yes, something that was deemed to be very controversial was the counting of ballots in the wee hours of the morning. I think the Republicans are claiming that there's this big rush of ballots, that somebody was changing the ballots. Do you feel that there's going to be a change that will allow ballots to be counted before the polls close now? Is that something that's going to happen? I think that would resolve this controversy of these ballots in the middle of the night.
So no, I don't think it's going to change, because the clerks around the state and the agencies said to the legislature, change the law so that the clerks can start getting ready to count them absentee ballots. I mean, everyone knows that if a bunch of people are voted by absentee ballots, you got to sit them all there, and if you got to wait until election day and then you have central count, everyone knew that there were going to be ballots that were going to be counted in the middle of the night. Everyone knew that, right? Even the Republicans who screamed said that there was, I mean, look at Donald Trump knew, okay? He knew that that's just how it happens. When you got hundreds of thousands of ballots, you're not going to count them until sometime early in the morning. There's nothing unusual about it, nothing illegal about it. And it's just this notion. Now, there was a proposed legislative fix that they didn't enact that would have let the clerks to do it. So no, we're going to have it. And here's the thing: people like absentee ballots. People like just dropping it in the mail early and disappearing. I mean, thousands and thousands of Republicans used them, right? I mean, this idea of mailing ballots in a time when everybody loves convenience, when we just like to stream Netflix. how easy is it to, click on, my vote, get request your absentee ballot, it shows up. I mean, my wife and I did it through all of 2020. And it shows up, you mail it back early. And then you disappear. You don't have to show up, if it's pouring rain or if there's a huge blizzard. I mean, it is global warming, so it's, early elections are going to be more likely than not warm, but you still have to deal with, you still got to deal with my mom and all the people that are like her who have to have their family and friends get their absentee ballot in the mailbox. Because I think the policy should be to encourage people that want to vote to be able to vote and count their votes. All these actions and suggestions for legislative changes are all designed about making it harder for people to vote and easier to strike individual votes. And I think their theory is that somehow they win that argument in blue areas or, red areas. Now, we all know that Wisconsin is really purple. It's just shades of purple, right? Waukesha is not bright red. Waukesha is pretty purple. Milwaukee is not pure blue, right? It's a blue or purple. But actually, I think us talking about red and blue has really helped politicize and created differences and conflicts rather than saying, look, we're purple and, how do we make sure we count all the votes? Other folks, comments, thoughts, questions? Okay, Margo. Okay, Jerry, go ahead.
Okay, so okay if I ask a second one?
Yeah, just fire away. I think we're on to
Okay.
what, 1 o'clock?
All right, with Bob Spindell sitting on the Elections Commission, after what he did with signing a fraudulent document, certification, how do you, the rest of you who sit on the Election Commission, feel about him still having a seat there? I mean, it's got to be, for what he did, I think seems to me it's criminal.
I don't want to weigh in on whether it's criminal or not. What I do know is a crime. Everybody that stormed our Capitol and flew the Confederate flag on January 6th. Remember, the Confederate flag has never flown in our Capitol until January 6th of last year. Never. I mean, Lee and his whole army could never get it there. And those folks are being charged. Now, how it all plays out, investigating, I don't know where that's at yet. There is a pending complaint before the commission. I'm not going to weigh in on that whole issue. I can say this, that, the first 2 years we had mostly were 6-0 votes and there was a couple 4-2 votes. I mean, the 6 of us really tried to make a concerted effort to just implement whatever the law, knowing that we really couldn't make the policy on what the elections were. So, this guidance that we had, nobody thought it was controversial at the time. I mean, this one about whether your spouse's whole address, including the zip code, had to be on there for someone to count your ballot was, it was an absurd thought. And the Republicans said, look, we got to let everybody know that, they can fix this. They can go call a voter or figure it out. If you can figure it out, we should count those votes. I mean, they wanted all the votes counted for Donald Trump. And my view is that, we should continue to count the votes. Now, Bob Spindell did run a campaign against Dean Knutson that I found out later was within Republican circles to get on the commission. So he ran a very partisan campaign within the Republican Party to get appointed. With Bob there, we have had more schism votes and more 3-3 votes than before. And there's no question in my mind that Bob Spindell has been part of that. But I know this, that the pressures on Dean and Marge and Bob are huge on, what you're going to vote. Megan Wolf's had threats. I mean, people have, for the first time, like a lot of threats for just, implementing the law. So personally, it bothers me about Bob. It does. How you can swear an oath to the Wisconsin Constitution and know that our laws say that the popular vote wins. And, he knew that Biden won and that, by the time those false electors got sent to DC, he knew that the Wisconsin Supreme Court had come down and said under Wisconsin law, right, Biden won fair and square. So if you take an oath to follow the Wisconsin Constitution and the Wisconsin Supreme Court, and they've said that Trump lost, how do you, as a member of the commission, in good faith, send your elector, as an elector to DC to say that Trump won? I mean, our public laws say, we count them by the folks. I mean, who knows what the law is going to be, but right now the popular vote still controls elections in the state. We'll see what happens after November. Jim, I see your hand up.
Mark, when does your term expire? Are you eligible to be reappointed? And how do you fold all this work into your law practice?
That's a great, the last one's a great question. When we all got recruited, we were told, because they sort of compared us to the judges that had done this before. They said, you're going to meet 4 to 6 times a year, maybe 8 hours, no big deal, right? I think 2020, I don't know, we're close to 40 meetings. I know that we were in session more than the Senate and the Assembly. And we got $100 a meeting, and they get their full time for not doing anything. So I know we work for free a lot on democracy. So I think I get less sleep than I used to. I definitely dream about elections a lot more. But what I did 2 things. So Peter Barca appointed me first. I was one of the 3-year terms because they were split 3 and 5, the 5-year terms. Gordon Hintz reappointed me. So my term 16 was 319. I'm up in 24, right? I think I have to do the math. So I don't have any plans on leaving. Especially when they have a gun at my head. It's not like me just to run away under those circumstances. And, I learned a lot from folks on here. I see Judge McMahon there. I mean, she was always my Marbury judge. That was a fearless trial judge that was ready to rule on the constitutional questions and wouldn't punt to, lesser folks. So, people taught me well, and frankly, I'm having a lot of fun. It's a blast, but it is time consuming. But I get to then talk to folks like folks here, my friends, and so. But I do need you guys to become Paul Reveres. I mean, we have to figure out how to get our fellow citizens engaged on these issues. And if anybody has got some good ideas, please let me know, because I'm like, I haven't figured out what's I'm a fisher person. So you fish and you change baits all the time. And you're like, what works? I still don't know what is it, what is the message that we throw out there to folks that they say, oh my God. Now, I thought when I said you got Republicans that are willing to put Republicans in jail for senior citizens voting safely, I thought that might attract some attention, but it's, you know, our life of affluence and COVID and Netflix, powerful, anyway, powerful noise. But if anybody has any good ideas, please let me know, because if you make an argument and some people bite, we need to really share it so everybody knows what to do. Anything else? I'm just looking in here in the chat. Thank you for the comments, folks. And I saw who said they were running elections at 29? Chrissy,
Chrissy.
thank you, Chrissy.
Oh, hi, Vicky. Yeah, I'm Chrissy Fung from the Milwaukee Turners.
That's awesome.
Yeah,
Well,
thank you. I've been a poll worker since I was 16 in California, and then I've worked in California, Milwaukee, and now Waukesha.
Awesome. Well, thank you very, very much. Without everybody weighing in and rowing the boat, our boat's going to sink.
All right, any other questions? All right, then I thank you for coming. Thank you, Mark, so much for talking with us today. Very
Thank you so
informative.
much for having me, Margot. Really appreciate it.
We can do our best to get the word out to everyone. I do want to let everyone know about our next virtual salon. It's not set yet. It might not be on a Wednesday because of the dates, but we're hoping to have the 2 District 2 judicial candidates at a candidate forum. So that's the appellate position. Lori Kornblum was appointed by Evers just in January, and Maria Lazar is going to run against her. So even if you're not in Waukesha or Ozaukee counties, I encourage you to attend just to learn about the candidates and to see what else is going on in the nearby appellate court. And then I also want to let you know that we've rescheduled our fundraising event with Mark Joseph Stern. He's a writer from Slate. He covers the Supreme Court, and he's going to fly in from Washington, D.C. for an evening event with us. And that will be, it's rescheduled. It was supposed to be in September. We postponed it because of COVID. We've rescheduled it for Thursday, May 19th. And we're hoping by then COVID will calm down a little bit with the spring, and the venue has an indoor-outdoor area with a patio outside. So we're hoping that we can safely have that event come May. And so look for more information on that. And I've updated the WJI events page to reflect that as well. So if, through the next month or two, if you want more information, look at our events page for that. Again, thank you for joining us. We hope you stay safe, and until we see you again, whether by Zoom or in person,